Hello, everybody. My name is Maya Worden, and I'm with the Social Justice team at the YWCA Silicon Valley. I want to thank you all so much for joining me in this short 30-minute presentation to talk about the 2020 census and to ensure that everyone understands the importance of it and to spread the word. So I just wanted to go over my objectives for today. In this presentation, I really want to share important information about the 2020 census and to ensure that everyone understands that they should fill it out for their own benefit, as well as for the benefit of those around them. The YWCA works to assist diverse communities as well as survivors, all of whom will benefit from filling out the census. The census has the potential to increase aid and assistance to all of these people, meaning that it is vital to fill it out yourself, as well as to encourage your loved ones and all of those around you in your community and in your neighborhood to do the same. So I wanted to start out by going over the most important dates of the 2020 census. First of all, we should all know that the census occurs every 10 years, with the last one being in 2010 and the next one not being until 2030. So first of all, in mid-March, the Census Bureau began distributing the census to addresses across the United States, as well as in the 5 territories. This is when the census was mailed out to your address and when you may have first received it, anywhere between March 12th and April 1st. April 1st is the next and possibly the most important day of the census. It is considered to be Census Day, and it is a key reference date for the 2020 census. However, I want to emphasize that this does not mean it's a deadline of any sort. It is simply used as a day to determine who is counted and where they are counted in the 2020 census. When you respond, you will tell the Census Bureau where you are living as of April 1st, 2020. And you should include everybody who usually lives and sleeps in your home. You can respond before or after this date. So when you first got it mailed to you, you may have responded right away. In that case, that's awesome. And you can still respond after the date of April 1st. We really encourage you to respond as soon as you can. As I said before, people have been filling out and sending in their information since then. But on August 11th, census takers will begin to visit addresses of those who have not yet responded to the 2020 census, because it is a required document. They will likely be asking why exactly the address has not sent it back, and just really trying to encourage them to do so as soon as they can. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the 2020 deadline has been moved up by 1 month, and it is now ceasing all operations on September 30th. This includes mailed operations, online operations, as well as phone operations. So you need to make sure that you are counted before this date. In light of the COVID-19 outbreak, the U.S. Census Bureau is continually adjusting the 2020 census operations in order to really protect the health and safety of the American public, as well as the Census Bureau employees. They're doing their best to implement all guidance from the federal, state, and local authorities regarding COVID-19. And the goal of all of this is to ensure that there is a complete and accurate count of all communities across the United States and its 5 territories. Like I said, the Census Bureau has been pushed up 1 month, meaning we have a lot less time to fill it out, so please try to do so as soon as you can. So what is the census? The census is simply a quick government survey that is asking for the name, the race, and the ethnicity of each person in all households across the US and its 5 territories. Like I mentioned before, the census was sent out in March, but it is still very easily available to complete today. It only takes a few short minutes to fill out, and it is not too late. Still open. If the census asks, like I said, how many people were living at the address that you were living at on April 1st, 2020. It also asks if your house is owned by yourself or by someone else in this household with a mortgage or a loan, which includes home equity loans. Is your house owned by you or someone in this household and is free and clear, so without a mortgage or a loan? Is your house rented? Is your house occupied without payment of rent? The census then asks for your telephone number, and then the age, sex, date of birth, nationality, and race of each person living at the address. Please keep in mind that every single person is required to fill out or be accounted for on the census. Since it is expected and required that everyone in the U.S. will fill it out, to the best of my knowledge, the Census Bureau will not be accounting for those who didn't, because it would be simply very difficult to do this and know where the people that didn't fill it out are located. I know that someone asked about whether there will be a percentage accounted for those who do not fill it out. However, the whole point of the census is to get really accurate demographics of where the populations across the country are clustered. So it would be really difficult to adjust for assumptions of where the people are that didn't fill it out, how many people they're living with, etc. All of which are very important for this data. So continuing on what the census is all about, it is an address-based count. The census is meant to count and understand the demographics of our country's population. Every house must include all those who are living there, and this includes roommates and all those that are sharing the space, regardless of familial or blood relationship. For example, I am a college student and I live in a house with 7 other people. So when we filled out the census, we included all the people that we are living with, even though we are not related to each other and may spend a few weeks or months back at home with our families at times. We still fill it out for where we are living most of the time. It's very important to emphasize that there is no citizen question on the 2020 census. Even if you are undocumented or an undocumented immigrant, you must still fill out the census in order to get potential funding and programs for your community. None of the information that you provide will be shared with ICE or with law enforcement, so you will be able to fill it out without having to include your citizen status and then potentially worrying about retaliation from either of these entities. This is done to ensure that undocumented folks feel comfortable filling out the census and including their information and feel comfortable being able to fill it out without having to worry that they will get in trouble of any sort with federal or local government. So why should we fill out the census? What does it affect? What is the point of the census? The census count information is used to make very important federal budget decisions. And these decisions will affect the next decade, the next 10 years, because the next census is not until 2030. This next statistic is pretty crazy. I was very surprised to learn this myself, but it's true. Each person that is not counted can result in $1,000 per year in community funding for the next 10 years. Each person, which is a great deal of money. This could result in $10,000 per person in federal funding for programs until the next census in 2030. It's a lot of money and a lot of important places that money could go if you fill out the census. As a nonprofit, we at the YWCA support communities that are typically underfunded and underrecognized, such as women, the LGBTQ community, survivors, and racial minorities. These groups really need the funding the most because they are traditionally underrecognized by governments and by programs. And by filling out the census, you can ensure that your community receives the representation politically and through community funding that it needs the most. So the question about who gets counted on the 2020 census is very simple, very short, and very easy. Everyone. Every single person living in the United States must get counted on the 2020 census. And this includes babies, young children, undocumented immigrants, college students, citizens that are living abroad, those experiencing houselessness, those without a permanent address, formerly incarcerated folks, the elderly, currently incarcerated folks. Every single person is meant to be accounted for. All of these people can and will be able to use the funding for their communities and for programs that will benefit themselves and everyone around them. It's vital to encourage everyone you know, especially those that may not have access to social media or to the internet, and who therefore may not be available of how to fill out the census, and that they should fill it out ASAP in the next few weeks or today if possible. So as for how people are counted, there are various ways to fill out the census, and this ensures that since there's so many mediums, everyone will be able to fill it out, regardless of their access to perhaps the internet or a phone. So you can fill it out online by going to mycensus2020.gov and filling out the survey. A mailed ID number was sent out back in March. And it is helpful to use this when filling it out online, but it is not necessary. You can just use your address and fill out the census that way. You can also fill out the census by phone by calling 1-844-330-2020 and answering the survey verbally. And I will leave that number up for a moment and repeat it again so everyone can get it down. And you can also fill it out by mail. The census was mailed out back between March and April 1st, and it can just be mailed back to the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau is also available in 12 languages, additionally English. So this ensures that over 99% of all US households will be able to respond to the census in the language that they are most comfortable with. The census is available in Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, Japanese, and English. So no one that speaks these languages will have to worry about translating the form themselves or speaking in a language that they are not comfortable with or not being able to fill it out because they don't speak any certain language. The census is available in all these languages to really increase participation, regardless of what language you speak and what language you are most comfortable with. When should you respond is also a very short and easy answer. You should respond as soon as possible, ASAP. Please respond to the census today, either right after this presentation or even during this presentation. You can multitask a little if you haven't done so already. Please do so. It is really important to get this done ASAP because, as I said, starting on August 11th, census takers will be visiting addresses of those who have not responded. They will be practicing social distancing standards and they will be wearing masks, but it is regardless, it's still best to fill it out right now, if you can, to avoid any unnecessary encounters. There is really no reason not to get it done just because it's better not to have to deal with any unnecessary and extra exposure and have to answer the questions on why you have not filled it out yet, because it's really convenient, really easy, really fast. And either way, I feel like it's just best to not have to worry about how do these census takers know my address, how do they know I haven't filled it out. The answer to that is simple. They use previous census data, information from the USPS, as well as satellite imagery to get addresses and to figure out who has not filled it out. But it's still best just not to have to worry about this, be confused about having to deal with someone from the Census Bureau. So just fill it out as soon as you can. As for where you should get counted, this can be the most confusing question. We get counted where we live and sleep most of the time during the year. So for example, I mentioned that I am living at my house of college for the majority of the year. So I filled out the census as living here as opposed to with my parents back home, since I only spend a few weeks back there. There is also, luckily, a system in place to count those who do not have permanent addresses as well. For example, for people that are living in transitory locations such as RVs or in motels, they will be counted where they're sleeping in the month of September. Census takers will be visiting various campgrounds and locations across the country to count these people. Those experiencing houselessness will also be counted because they are really important to understand where to put more shelters and various other infrastructure that those who do not have a house will want to use. They will be counted at service locations as well as soup kitchens, encampments, and other outdoor locations between September 22nd and 24th. And this will be a huge operation just to really make sure that those who are experiencing houselessness at this time will be counted for and get the resources that they potentially need. Those who live in group homes will also be counted. This includes those living in dormitories, on college campuses, in prisons, as well as nursing homes. They will all be counted in various methods. This includes either the forms will be filled out by them, by whoever is the administrator of their facility, or by passing out the forms individually to all those who are living in the group homes. The census really affects a ton of areas of policy as well as community support. It was originally created for redistricting reasons for the House of Representatives to make sure that everyone is equally represented in Congress. The census actually still does do this, so please fill out the census in order to ensure that your district can get recounted for the upcoming election and potentially increase the representation that your city or town or district really needs and deserves. However, it now also affects really important budget decisions, and I'm going to list those off. There's tons of them. There's more than I haven't said, but I'm going to list off sort of some of the main and the important ones that communities can definitely use. The census affects food in schools, Head Start, Medi-Cal, CalFresh, fire departments, as well as health clinics, which we know are especially important right now. They can affect where the health clinics are redistributed, where they are, to ensure that communities that are more clustered have more access to health clinics and testing centers. The census also affects the quality of education, the accessibility of community programs. It determines how much funding goes to certain services, such as for college tuition assistance, improving housing, improving jobs. A lot of businesses actually rely on census data once it is published to see where they should open new business fronts for people to access. The census also affects roads, transportation, infrastructure relating to bus stops, as well as the BART trains, etc. And it focuses on, it's important to also focus on elders and children, because by knowing the ages of the population in different areas of the country and where people are collected and clustered, the government will be able to tell which areas need which programs. So for example, if a lot of addresses in your community fill out that they have young children, there may be decisions to build a new library or other education services that these children may need, or it will just increase access for this. So people may wonder why exactly the government needs to know about race and ethnicity on the census and why this is so important for the next 10 years. And the answer to that is that information about race really helps federal agencies monitor compliance with anti-discrimination laws like the Voter Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. It also gathers statistics about the diversity of the United States and the geographic racial distribution of the population in our country, which can also, like I said, really increase aid for those who need it. One of the questions that I got in the survey that I sent out last week was if Hispanic and Latino members of the community if that's considered to be a race. The answer to that is actually no, it is not. Question 8 of the 2020 census asks if a person is Hispanic, Latino, or of Spanish origin. And for the census, Hispanic origin is actually viewed as a heritage or as a lineage, but not as a race. Question 9 asks about race, and the options for what race you consider yourself to be is white, Black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Chinese, Filipino, Asian Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, other Asian, Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro, other Pacific Islander, or some other race. As for the sex question on the census, The Census Bureau does state that all 2020 questions that involve personal characteristics are based on self-identification. So when filling out the census, one selects the box for which biological sex you identify with. While this is not necessarily as inclusive as it could be for gender fluid folks, it is at least a step in the right direction regarding self-identification, as opposed to feeling like you have to put down the sex that is listed on your driver's license or on your birth certificate. Instead, it is the sex that you consider yourself to be and recognize yourself as being. I really want to emphasize how important children are on the census. Children were, unfortunately, the most underrepresented group on the 2010 census. 1 million children were not counted for on the census, making them, like I said, the most undercounted group in the United States. And unfortunately, California was actually the state with the highest rate of undercounting, or of undercounted children. There are various reasons that led to this. It could have been because a parent or a guardian who was filling out the census was unsure if the child counted because perhaps they can't vote or they can't speak, they're not of age yet, they can't drive, some reason like that. It may be because the child is living in 2 or multiple separate homes, or because there are multiple families sharing the same address and you're not sure if you should include all the families or just perhaps the family that owns the house, something like that, etc. There's multiple reasons, all of which are completely understandable, but it's also super, super important to make sure that you count all the children that are living in or at your address at the time during the census. This can affect really important decisions for children, such as should a new library or school or a pediatric hospital be built in the community. It can affect whether Head Start for pre-K is expanded, or understand whether schools are being overcrowded. Even food deserts and decreasing food deserts are connected to the census. This funding affects children during really a lot of times their key developmental years. And 10 years is a really long time to not get the funding that is necessary for children. For example, say your child is 7 and they're not counted for, that will affect until they're 17, which is a really long range of not potentially getting that $1,000 per person per year in community funding, which can be used to increase their education and to make sure that they get food in schools, stuff like that. It's really, really important. Some other undercounted groups in the United States include the LGBTQ community, renters, as well as people with disabilities. Like I said, there are various reasons of undercounting, though, especially in the Bay Area where we have a whole lot of people. It's really important to get everyone to fill it out. It's really important to get LGBTQ members of the community and renters and people with disabilities, the important federal decisions and important budget decisions that they need to get them just so that they get recognized in the eyes of the government. So life has been upended since April. The census being mailed out inconveniently fell around the same time that shelter in place began, back in April and March. So it's completely understandable if the census just happened to slip your mind and you have not responded yet, because there's just so much else going on. There's a lot of other things to focus on, but you still can fill it out very easily, and you really should do so, especially now in these unprecedented times, because we don't know exactly how long we're going to need health clinics everywhere, and it's really important to count yourself where you are. It can be confusing knowing where exactly to count yourself as living, as your address being, because tons of changes may have occurred in your life, and if you haven't filled out the census yet, you might not know exactly what to do when filling it out. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to go over some scenarios about the census to help clarify these. So you may have been disrupted because of a temporary work location change, because of COVID-19, because of your family, or for some other reason. You should still count yourself at your usual place of residence. However, if you were temporarily staying somewhere on April 1st, but you aren't sure if you will return to your usual residence, you should count yourself where you were on April 1st. Additionally, if you have moved or changed residences since April 1st, count yourself where you were on April 1st. So, like I mentioned before, April 1st is a really key important date. It's known as Census Day, and it's usually like the key point of where you should be counting, or when you should be counting yourself as. College and university can also be pretty confusing because most of us were sent home from our college and university because of COVID-19. If you will most likely should be counted where you live at school. We normally spend around 9 even to 12 months a year there, so it is the majority of the year, and this is where you should be counted, is the community that should be affected because you are living there. If you lived on campus housing, you actually don't need to do anything. Your school will include you in their census count for the dorms or for the other form of campus housing that you are living at, so they will count you. If you lived off campus in residential housing or apartments, you should count yourself and any housemates or roommates that you normally live with at this address, because this is your usual and most lived at residence. So this can be a little confusing for some folks, but you need to know that if your parents perhaps weren't sure about this, if you're not sure if your roommate back at school filled out the census, then fill it out anyways where you are. The census has programs that are in place that are able to make sure that there aren't multiple responses and to fix problems with duplicate responses. So if you're not sure, then please still fill it out. Another potential reason that children are undercounted is because their parents or guardians are separated, and perhaps they expected the other person to include the child on their census, or perhaps they weren't sure where to count them as. So I just want to go over living at multiple residences or your child living at multiple residences during the year. So if you or your child does live in multiple residences, please count yourself or your child where they live for the majority of the year. So if your child spends, let's say, 7 to 8 months a year with you and the other months with someone else, then count them as living with you because it is where they are for the most of the year. Therefore, the community that should be affected. If you or your child lives equally in 2 residences, so perhaps a child has equally split custody throughout the year, please count them where they're living on April 1st, 2020, because that is Census Day. If you have already responded to the 2020 census, or somebody has responded on your behalf, like for example, parents or roommates, and since then you've moved, then you don't need to respond again because your name has already been counted. But like I said, if you're not sure if you've already been counted by someone else who lived with you, please just go ahead and respond to the 2020 census. Make sure that you as an individual are counted, make sure everyone that you're living with right now are counted, and provide as much information as you possibly can for each person. The Census Bureau is able to identify and correct duplicate responses. So as I said in the last slide, it's much better to be safe than sorry and to make sure that you are counted. So I really want to emphasize that the census is safe. One of the reasons that there is such a high rate of undercounting, especially in the Bay Area, is because people may be living in larger groups of people. They may have more families with them that are on their lease and may be scared of listing the number of people that they're actually living with for fear of eviction or some sort of retaliation from a landlord. I really want to note that it is still encouraged to include all those you're living with on the census, and that no one will find out that there are more than the allowed amount of people living at the address. Law enforcement, landlords, and ICE will not have access to any of the information provided on the census. In fact, all census workers and Census Bureau members take an oath before the census, and they pledge to withhold or to uphold confidentiality for life. Violating this oath is a federal crime, and it is punishable with prison time or a fine of up to $250,000. So please fill it out. Do not worry about anyone else finding out about your information. It is kept 100% confidential. However, it is also very important to note that the census will never ask for any private personal information such as your social security number, your bank account, your credit card numbers. They will never ask for anything on behalf of a political party, anything about who you're voting for, and they will never ask for money or donations. So if you receive something in the mail or on the internet that's asking for any of this information, do not fill it out. It is most definitely not coming from the census. So make sure you don't share any of this private information with a third party. In addition, if someone who is claiming to be from the Census Bureau comes to your home to collect a response, make sure that they have a valid ID badge, which will include their photograph, the U.S. Department of Commerce watermark, as well as an expiration date. Please really try to make sure and stay safe during these times. The Census Bureau members will have all this ID on them when they come to your door to see why you haven't responded yet. And if you feel uncomfortable, just ask to see this, and just really make sure to try to stay safe and make sure that you're not giving this information to anyone that is not from the census. However, it would be just much easier to just try to fill it out right now, today, just to make sure that you don't have to deal with worrying about what anyone is coming to your address in the first place. So just to close out, we really need people to take the 2020 census today. The shortened deadline that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation is really quickly approaching, and it's problematic to communities that are struggling to get counted already. If you've already filled out the census, please try and inspire others. Tell everyone, your family, your friends, neighbors, and coworkers. Please especially try to tell your parents or your grandparents who may not be aware of the census or how to fill it out. And they can also be really effective with programs that are for seniors. By filling out the census, communities can overcome trials and emerge stronger than ever and more unified together, with increased important resources for everyone, as well as vital changes to redistricting that they may need because of increased population. It can take as little as a few minutes to get it done, so please try to help yourself and your community by filling it out so we can get a complete and accurate count. And remember that everyone counts, every single person counts on the census. If you have any remaining questions about the census, I've done a great deal of research on this in the past few weeks, so please email me at ywca_advocacy@ywca.sv.org. I'm really happy to answer any questions you have. I know the survey was sent out a little bit late last week, so you may not have had a chance to submit your questions. So please reach out and contact me if you are unsure about any of the information I have shared, or if you have any follow-up questions. And I just wanted to thank everyone so much for joining me today. This is a really important year that's coming up, and the census can affect so much in the next decade. So really want to thank you all so much for joining and learning a little bit more, and also for sharing all this information with everyone that you can to make sure that they are accounted for. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your summer.